So one thing I'm interested in is it possible to do a very, very small turn? Is it possible to do a 5-degree bend? So I'm stuck with a problem here where this needs to be like that. I could just cut this at a slight angle, but I thought I'd try and do a professional very small bend just as an exercise. I don't know if it's possible, but let's see if I can cut a piece that can fit in just right. So I'm going to take this one and see if I can just cut it over there at a very small angle, and then I can use this as the turning point. Okay, so with a bit of grinding I've managed to create a very small turn, which I think is just what I need. And so you can actually do this, it's not as difficult as I thought, so that was quite a lot of fun. So that worked out quite nicely. There's the very slight curve. So we have our 3 pieces, this one, the 2 downpipes, and the collector. So this is going to weld onto there, and this is going to fit in over there. The only trick now is to line everything up, and that is actually very difficult because there's no space in this area to put this in. And if you look at the original design, they have, this is how it comes. This isn't warped because of heat. This was manufactured this way, which is an extremely narrow, you can't really see down there, but this is extremely narrow. And the reason is because you have the oil filter right over here, and then you have the transmission over here, and over here you have the upper control arm. And the control arm just misses touching this area. So you've got this problem that you want to line up these stainless steel V-clamps, actually called V, they're a butt join, and there's a V-clamp that actually pulls them together and seals. Now the problem is that it's very difficult to get them perfectly lined up. One technique that I found should work is you make an offset piece like this, and by rotating it you can change the angle of this whole setup. So all you need to do is get under the car, rotate this until whatever it is perfectly lined up or straight or has the right offsets or clearances or whatever you need. And when it's rotated into position, then you just mark it with a Sharpie. And then you can take everything out and weld this in, and you should have everything perfectly aligned. When you have to make adjustments, the easiest way to do that is just with a Dremel tool. And just make your tacks really small so you can cut it off easily. So there I can just break it off. So now I can redo this, and there's obviously a little bit of damage, but that's not serious. So just to give an idea of how difficult this is, we're going to go under the car and look at, okay, so here's our catalytic converter, and this is the rearmost clamp. Here is a 3-inch pipe, and it's only meant to have a 2.5 inch here, or 2.25 inch, I'm not sure. So I've actually squeezed this pipe to fit over this. I didn't have to squeeze it this much, but that's not a problem. Here's the bracket that holds the exhaust up. You can see it's connected to the lower transmission mount. So this from here moves with the engine. So here is the second clamp, and And here I messed up, so I had to actually cut a piece and put it in. And there is the oxygen sensor. Now I've put in two so that I can have my own oxygen sensor at some point. This has to clear the transmission, and it has to clear the sidewall here. So this is quite a tight fit. Over here, you can see you need a heat shield at this point. Otherwise you're going to end up heating up your dipstick, which would be bad. Here you need another heat shield to prevent heating up this rubber bushing. This is your upper control arm, and it's got a bushing here. And this bushing, I mean, it would probably melt if you didn't have this heat shield. I don't know. Then this pipe has to clear the oil filter and then finally meet the exhaust manifold over there. And you can see what a difficult number of curves is. It also has to clear this bolt over here. So this is really very, very complicated. You've got no space to work. I mean, you can see the way this car was not designed to fit a V8 engine. Now, if you look here, I've actually pressed in a divot to clear this little corner over here. So you can see this whole situation is really quite ridiculous. So there we go. Now, this open hole is going to go around and up into this side here. And there, so it's going to come down and it's going to just miss this indentation and then come round into here. So that's how this whole thing goes together. So now we have tack welded everything together and even welded some of the seams and checked for fits. Now, it's very important to tack weld everything and check fits before you start welding. And the reason for this is that tack welding is easy to take off and to retry again. And you can see I've made some screw-ups. I've had to weld in, I had to cut this special piece. There doesn't need to be a seam here, but there is because I messed up. Once you've welded, it's very difficult to take apart. And then the other aspect is, even when you have welded, what you find is that you get warping. So you have to keep on checking your fit, because the warp is going to make things not line up again, and then you may have to do something. These V-clamps are tricky. V-clamps warp when you weld them, so you have to clamp them and weld them while they are clamped, and make sure your clamp is very tight, and that way you get a perfectly flush surface when you clamp them, even because it's going to warp together. They're going to tend to warp with each other. So what I've done is I've actually marked this with a Sharpie, lined them up, clamped it, and now I'm going to weld. So this is the Home Depot, and we seem to have found the high heat section. We're going to need some primer, and we're going to need some aluminium flat. We're done. So here we have the completed product. So we're just going to count the number of separate pieces that are involved in this build so you can see how complicated it is. I mean, this is a relatively simple exhaust, but it's actually a lot of work. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. That's 16 pieces to make up this exhaust. So you can see this is really very time consuming. It took many more hours than I expected. And it's partly due to the fact that very tight clearances are involved with this car, but that's not the only reason. It is actually very difficult and time consuming to build an exhaust. I'll just go look closely at some of the welding and the internals. We can look down there. And we can look in here. So the transitions are fairly clean. This is a properly formed transition between 2.5 inch and 3 inch. And this is a properly formed transition between 2.25 inch and 2.5 inch. Now, there was no way to do this transition with a proper mandrel bent 3-inch tube, because this has to be squashed in order to fit over the transmission cross member. And this is also the reason why this is made in so many pieces, because to get this piece over the transmission cross member requires that you either remove the transmission cross member or you make a separate piece with 2 separate joins in order to be able to get this out. But you're not going to get this out if it's all in one piece. And this makes this a very difficult exhaust because of the path. So that's why I've made this in separate piece, and it of necessity has to have a bend over here. Now this should have had a mandrel bend turn to make a nice turn, and another turn over there, but of course that's a luxury that I didn't get involved in. It's complicated by the fact that this has to be compressed. So this compression is very smooth. So if you look inside here, you can see that there ought not to be any constriction or pressure differential across this. But Vanilli type tubes like this actually incur very little friction coefficient. So just to show how carefully this is lined up, so this is the driver's side, and you can see how close it comes. And you can't even get your finger in there, or you can just get your finger in there. This is how close it comes to the oil pan, and then it scoops under the oil pan, comes across, and then comes into the join. So this is a very, very tight fit. There you can see it's nicely missing all the key point. It's not hitting this bolt. There's a little bit of clearance there. Well, that flange is nicely lined up over there. And the oxygen sensor is in. So everything is ready to roll.